Let's see what James Rapien thinks. James, thank you for joining the program. We'll start with that. I don't know where your thought process is with this whole Joe Burrow situation, the contract. Before I ask you maybe the most meaningful question about it, your overall thoughts on which camp you would be in about who should get the deal done and who should be maybe the ones that should care more about it.
Well, the Bengals, obviously, they need to get the deal done because Joe Burrow is the most important player, probably in team history, certainly the most important person in that organization, including all of ownership. Like if you say, all right, Katie Blackburn has to retire, but you keep Joe Burrow, and you had the ultimatum, you would have to do that because Burrow's just more important. That said, I don't think there's a chance Burrow plays this season without a contract either, because I think a contract gets done. I don't think that this is an issue yet. And it may be uncomfortable because we don't have all of the details, really any details, because they've kept it tight to the vest. I just think that something's going to get done. And this could be as simple as Joe knowing that there's a framework in place, but hoping that they can get T done first. That said, I do think it's going to be interesting if he goes out there and potentially practices this coming week. Maybe he doesn't practice this coming week. Is that because he's still dealing with after effects from the calf strain, or does it become a contract thing? I think we are getting to that point. We're not there yet, but that is looming if they don't get a deal done over the next few days.
Is your gut feeling about the Bengals fans and I guess the overall opinion of the deal itself maybe a little too optimistic? Is Joe Burrow going to take the angle of what probably most of us would do, which is I'm going to look out for myself and get as much as I possibly can? He's obviously said publicly that he wants to take care of the guys and he wants to make sure that it's a team-friendly deal. However, what's that really mean? In your heart of hearts, do you think that it'll end up being kind of a team-friendly deal, or do you think at the end of the day Joe Burrow is going to get what he thinks he deserves, and that's just a lot of money?
I've tried to almost prepare people because there's been all of this talk about, he could take a Mahomes-like deal. No quarterback's doing that. I think deep down, if you gave Patrick Mahomes truth serum, he regrets taking that deal because he's looking around at all these quarterbacks that aren't nearly as good as him, not even really close or in the same universe, and they're getting way more than he is, and they still got rid of Tyreek Hill and can't pay Chris Jones for whatever reason, and their left tackle is different now, obviously, with Orlando Brown Jr. I could go on and on and on. And so Burrow, I think it's going to be a huge deal, probably 5 years. I know the long-term contract sounds so much better, and it allows the Bengals to be, way more flexible long-term. And I get that, and I would try to do that if I was the Bengals. But if you're Joe Burrow, you're 26 now. You were old coming into the league. I think you would love to get a 4-year deal. Maybe you go to 5 to be a little more team friendly, and then you get another bite of the apple in a few years when you're getting closer to the end of that contract. When who knows what quarterbacks will make? Maybe $70 million per year. I mean, it's gone up a ton already after that Mahomes deal. I think it could continue and will continue to do that.
So in your opinion, you think obviously that you mentioned at the top here that to T. Higgins, you think that deal's probably going to get done along with Joe Burrow's. That's what your gut's telling you. Hypothetically, though, if they're not able to figure out something with T. Higgins, are they going to have to – would you think they'd have to eventually, again, trade him at some point? Is that in the deck of the cards if you're not able to extend him, or do you just franchise tag him and you just kind of maybe just you let him go at the end of that?
I think it's twofold. One, I don't know if a T. Higgins deal gets done. I think Burrow might say focus on T right now. We have at least a framework in place. Try to get him done, and we can revisit this before the start of the season. That's complete speculation, but I could totally see him being that way in hopes of them being able to keep T. Higgins long term. If they don't get a deal done, which is probably how I would lean with T, given the agent, David Mulligetta, they did this song and dance with Jesse Bates, who had the same agent. And so until you get a deal done with Mulligetta, I'm wondering if you can get a deal done, because clearly he had his eyes on bigger money for Jesse Bates. And T. Higgins is a more valuable player. He plays a more valuable position, and he's probably as good, even though he doesn't have Pro Bowls and things like that. I think we know how valuable T. Higgins is to a ton of teams, but certainly this wide receiver centric Bengals team. And so if you go into the season. And like I said, it's probably more likely than not that you go into it without a long-term extension for T. Higgins, and he plays out this year, and he plays well, and he stays healthy, and he has another 1,000-yard plus season. Maybe he goes 1,300 yards. You can't just let that walk. Now, I understand franchise tagging him and letting him play it out. I get the logic, but they didn't get anything for Jesse Bates because they signed Orlando Brown Jr. No compensatory pick, nothing like that. You can't let T. Higgins leave for nothing, even if it's after the 2024 season. So to me, if you can't get a deal done this offseason over the next few weeks, let him play it out. If he plays well, like everyone expects him to, tag him. And if you can't, or you don't think you're going to be able to get a long-term extension done, you trade him and you get a first rounder plus more. I think he would have more value in this market than A.J. Brown had, for example. And that may be weird for some people. I think that the wide receiver market continues to go up. T. Higgins will be 25, and I think there will be a lot of suitors, teams vying for his services.
All right, we're getting down towards the end of the preseason. Obviously, roster cuts are right around the corner. The 53-man's going to have to get finalized. When you watch the game this upcoming weekend, is there one specific position? Is there a multitude of guys that you're looking for? Where do you think the final cuts are? Do you have a crystal ball? Do you have the last man cut in your mind? Where are you at on the roster?
These quarterbacks, I mean, there aren't many spots up for grabs. I would say 51 are probably done. It's really tough to find an open roster spot. And these two quarterbacks, that's really the biggest question at this point because of injury or because of guys emerging or whatever it is. Who's going to be the backup? And I still don't really know. I think Jake Browning came into this week with a slight edge over Trevor Siemian. Siemian has the experience. Could he win the coaching staff over with a nice performance in Washington? Maybe. Or is it someone else? Is it a guy that's going to get cut elsewhere, potentially traded, for a late rounder? I think that's interesting. The offensive line room is one that, do they keep 9 guys or 10? And as of now, I think they do keep Jackson Carman. I don't think they cut a second-round pick from just a few years ago. At the same time, he's been underwhelming overall throughout this 2.5 years, going into his third season now with the Bengals. And so do you try to move on, sort of like you did with Billy Price? I think that's interesting if you can find the right trade. Not sure they'll be able to, but those are a couple of the things I'm looking at going into Saturday.
So essentially, you think obviously the quarterback's the main priority this upcoming game, and then ultimately from there's not many spots available, period. The last thing here that comes to mind, I'm sure there's some other knowledgeable people in the room that might have better questions than I. Did you accidentally get lumped in with a bunch of Big J journalists down there, and there was just collateral damage, or is there any? What exactly happened with the big? I don't want to say kind of difficult situation with Joe Mixon, but were you surprised by that, or what were your overall thoughts about that whole situation in general?
I mean, I've been critical of Joe Mixon's contract all offseason, and critical to me is honest. And so maybe that's it. I didn't really cover the off the field stuff much from an opinion standpoint. It's been pretty straightforward what's going on. So I don't think there's anything there that he could have an issue with. But yeah, I mean, $12.7 million cap hit. That's too much for Joe Mixon in this running back market. And I still stand by that. So maybe that's it. Maybe he caught, clips of me saying that, or maybe articles or whatever the case is, right? You never know. So I don't know exactly, but I don't think I covered him unfairly this offseason. Obviously, the Bengals restructured his deal based on the running back market, his performance. There's a lot of things that go into that, and he's still around. So, good for Joe that he's still in a Super Bowl contender, and I just keep doing my job regardless of how he feels one way or the other.
That's more than fair. Speaking of which, the one last thing that I just remembered, you obviously had a chance to talk to Orlando Brown Jr. This Bengals franchise in general, as much as people might want to complain about management a while back and the Brown family, et cetera, they've been very loyal. I mean, they have been incredibly loyal to some of their players. You could say they're being loyal to Joe Mixon. My question to you is when guys are starting to take, to Orlando Brown Jr.'s point, he took less money, I believe it was his words, not ours, his words, to go to the Bengals. maybe that's more or less because of obviously what's in front of the Bengals. They have a chance to win the Super Bowl. But I've always wondered if that's ever an advantage that the Bengals will eventually have based off of how they've treated their players. They've been very loyal to them. Do you think that makes one difference or next, or is it just kind of Orlando Brown Jr. wanted a chance to play with Joe Burrow, and that's about what it was?
No, I think it can make a difference, but it doesn't make a difference when you don't have, like, they go hand in hand. You need to be able to win and be a contender. At the same time, it's like, oh, well, this is a fun place to play, great culture. They are loyal to you. They'll stick by you. They're not going to cut you with 2 years left on your deal. Like, you can make all of those cases now, especially in Mixons, because I think a lot of teams, we saw it in Minnesota with Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, and Jerry Jones loved Zeke, right? And so I think that is a selling point. I don't think it's the reason why guys necessarily come here, but it could certainly be a sweetener. And with Orlando Brown Jr., I think it might have mattered a little bit, especially because, well, he probably felt betrayed a bit by how things ended in Kansas City. I think he was thinking he was going to be there long term. Didn't work out. And it's nice for the Bengals because I think he's clearly their best left tackle that they've had in quite some time.
James, thank you for coming on the program. I appreciate you jumping in here. Obviously, I am not Thom Brennaman, but you've been nice enough to me to jump on here and chat it up and bring at least a little bit of knowledge from the Bengals front to the show. Obviously, Casey holds it down in here, but I am lacking in that department. I'll try to be better. But thank you.
How's Thom doing?
I
already was. How's he feeling?
I think Thom is I don't want to speak for him, too far, but I mean, ultimately, I think he's feeling a little bit better. I'm hopeful that next week he can at least update everybody on where he's at least in the studio, and be able to talk and have a conversation here live and let him kind of tell everybody where he's at. But I think that, he has continued to show confidence in the fact that he's going to be back one way or other, whether that's surgery or whether that's just the steroids. We'll wait to find out.
Sheesh. All right. So questionable for week 1. I was hoping it would be much better than that. So we'll see. But well, I hope he's doing better. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Thank you, James. We'll see. I mean, maybe Thom is on the same trajectory as Joe Burrow. Maybe he'll be back. Maybe he won't. I don't know.